Well, thanks for coming, everyone. This is very synchronistic, actually, because I had no idea where I was talking or who I was presenting to, but I actually got my start as a teenager when I discovered the Theosophical bookshop in Auckland. And one of my favourite bookshop for many, many years. And it's kept me going and kept me interested in you know, science and philosophy and evolving your consciousness. And this is what I see with this technology. This is not really so much about the technology. It's about consciousness. And this is where we are on the doorstep of this major, major shift in consciousness. And it is actually spreading spontaneously through the masses. And of course, a lot of people have a lot of catching up to do. So it's kind of where my qualification comes from, is my early days studies of the Theosophical Society. And of course, I spent some years as a yogi, practicing Raja Yoga, Hatha Yoga, Pranayama, all that sort of stuff, and studying intensely for some years. And at one point I reached a level where I was communicating with the dolphin consciousness. And I'm pretty sure the way I see it myself is that it was through my connection with the dolphin consciousness that I made contact with the extraterrestrial consciousness, beings from other planets. And before that, I'd studied natural therapies and fine arts, and I'd never even considered life on other planets, never even thought about it. And of course, I was introduced through a lady who knows this chap who channels an extraterrestrial by the name of Bashar. And on hearing his talks, it sounded, to my mind, exactly like you would imagine an enlightened being, a master, to come across. You know, it was like these were the words of a master, this extraterrestrial. And so the way he explains what's happening with us here, we're basically third-dimensional beings going fourth-dimensional, whereas on their planet they are already fourth-dimensional, going fifth-dimensional. And some very subtle things going on there, and this is why I say it's very interesting for me to be, you know, a part of this change and to see the technology that is developing alongside the consciousness, because it's all, you know, totally intertwined and connected. So just recently I've been learning computer science and stuff, so I've made a little PowerPoint presentation to entertain you, should I say. So just give us a jiffy and I'll hook this up. So here we go. Okay, so we have here, this is an image from the Hubble telescope. It's a deep field image, and they claim now to be able to see 18 billion light years into the distance. So that's only in one direction, remember? So you've got the other directions as well. So that makes pretty big space. And of course, this is the stretch of the limit of our technology that we have. And of course, our technology is growing and changing and improving all the time. So this is really just the beginning. You know, space. I have it from my ET friends that, okay, they've been travelling in space and time for quite some time, and they have not yet been able to discover a beginning of the universe. Right? So I kind of believe them rather than our Earth scientists. They're out there doing it. So space is really, really big. Now, if you take our galaxy that we're a part of, it's currently understood that our galaxy is around 100,000 light years across. And see these images here, these are galaxies. Is this going to work? So one of these here, this is not a smudge. This is a galaxy. There's another galaxy there. Now this is basically around 100,000 light years across. So these are very, very far away. There's another galaxy there, 100,000 light years across. So space is really, really, really big. And this is what Keshe is offering us, is to take us into space. Right? Now there are certain qualifying factors in order for us to actually go into space. Number one, we need to be a united planet in peace. Okay? Now Mr. Keshe is making huge efforts to bring peace to our world. They're really, really huge efforts to bring peace to our world. And I applaud for that. He's, one man can make such a massive difference. Massive difference. And so we need to be one planet. So we can go as one planet to meet other whole planets. And they're all in peace. This whole nonsense about war and space. And when you see all the science fiction movies and they're out there with guns, it's like, very cowboy. It's not how it is in space at all. Not at all. We've got a lot of growing up to do still. But I think we're well on the way. We really are well on the way. And so, space, the final frontier. Or is it? A great illusion. Outer space. Or in space. If we understand how the eye works, the information from apparently out there is taken through the lens of your eye, focused on the back of your iris, or inside your eye, then it's converted into electrical signals, and the entire universe is recreated seemingly inside your head. But it's not inside your head, it's in your consciousness. So your consciousness, our consciousness, my consciousness, is the container through which all of this imaginary physical universe is held in. Right? Consciousness is the creative force. It's not the other way around. Our scientists would have us believe that matter is the primary, and from that, souls are created and spirit is created out of the matter. I see it completely the other way around. And I will explain this a little bit later as we go along into this. So there are these space and counter space in a sense. One is apparently real and the other is apparently imaginary. But of course, we have a flat Earth, don't we? And the universe revolves around the Earth. We're the centre of the universe, but what it appears to be is not actually what it is it? And so everything, if you can turn things around, our physical universe is the creation of our consciousness. Our creation of our consciousness. And of course, we're not individual consciousnesses either. It is all one, the way I understand it. It's taken me a while to get there, but I'm getting there. Still getting there. And so, of course, when you look into space and you say, well, between each star there's like just over 4 light years distance between the star. And our nearest star, they say, somewhere between 4.2 and 4.4 light years to get to the next star. So are we going to get with our rockets? I don't think so. And also, if you notice, there's not just stars, there's not just planets. Space is actually full. It's not a void, it's not a vacuum. Okay, it's a vacuum, but it's not empty. Space is really, really full. Now this image is taken with other bandwidths of the electromagnetic spectrum, because you don't just have visible light. There's infrared, there's ultraviolet, and then they can take information from radio frequency, X-ray frequency, gamma ray frequency, and obviously the list is going to go on and on as our technology develops. And so space is actually very, very full. And of course, you don't want to meet a loose boulder as you're travelling at light speed through space, do you? You need a bit more than a tin can with a firecracker on the end of it. And of course, then we come back to the physical body. Of course, the physical body, man, is also made up of many, many layers. It's not just a physical body. There's your etheric matter, your subtle body, your plasma, and your emotional body and your mental body. They're all bodies that we use for our expression. The real person is a spiritual being, not a physical body. And that's something I really want to... People need to understand, we're not a body. We're not a body. A body is a vehicle. And so, when I look at this sort of technology, I think it's interesting. It's kind of strange when you understand the concepts that I understand. And you know, to think about this, you know, it really is not a spacecraft. I mean, they call it a space shuttle, but it's not a spacecraft. It's a tin can and a giant firecracker. I don't think I'd want to go on one of them. And so often I thought, well, you know, if we're really interested in going out into space, that's where you could ask people that know something about it. Of course, they exist. But of course, then, how do they get here? Well, they don't use rockets, obviously. And of course, they're not all bug-eyed midgets either. I'm actually a contactee. I made contact some years ago, 1987. And then some years later, I had another contact. The first contact I had was with an ET by the name of Bashar. It was a channel. And he was apparently communicating to us from his spaceship, which he lives in orbit on his planet, which is 500 light years distance. And the communication was instantaneously communicating. There's no wait for it. It's on the spot. And his communication, his wisdom and his wit was just, like I said before, it came across to me as that this guy's a master. He really knows his stuff. And he was communicating at the level, higher level. He was aware of your soul, and he was able to communicate with your soul being, which spans many lifetimes. And you could ask him any question, it didn't matter, any question, and he was bang with a perfect answer every single time. And then some years later, I got a bit notorious. I had a shop called UFO, and
that's where I met him, Ponsonby.
And because I was been doing some research, I came across this guy named Billy Myers, and he was a contactee for his entire life. And he was taking these photographs of flying saucers. And he was contacting, this is a Pleiadian woman by the name of Simgasi. It was one of his primary contacts. And of course, some reporters did a little paper, what do you call it, a story about me in the paper, and published one of the flying saucer photos. But of course, the Pleiadians monitor all of our publications. And so they saw this picture and the story about me, and so they came and checked me out. And so I met this gorgeous lady. And the thing that struck me was just her radiant look. Her skin was like translucent. You could see this woman was the most healthy person. And beautiful. But she came in my shop early one morning, and she stood in the corner where I have all my flying saucer pictures and stuff. And I, of course, went over and said hello, and she started quizzing me. And at one point in the conversation, I suddenly realised who she was. And she was aware of my thoughts. And at that same moment, she was like, oh, gotta go. And I was left hanging with that thought of who she was. She is a pilot of one of these craft. And I was like in shock for hours with that realisation. You know? But anyway, so that's another story altogether. But what we're looking at here is the Keshe story. So we'll carry on. Excuse me. So after meeting Bashar in 1987, one of the things that struck me, what he said, was that we already have all of the technology and all of the wisdom to turn our planet into the Garden of Eden that it deserves to be. And so at that point, I decided to start doing some research. And I got back to New Zealand. I went to the Harmonic Convergence in Hawaii, had a fantastic time. Came back to New Zealand, and at that point I decided, okay, I'm going to start doing some research in science and stuff. And I was looking through the second-hand bookshops, and I found a copy of this book, Occult Chemistry, published in 1913. After 30 years of research, Annie Besant and Charles Leadbeater had published their studies, and this book, I found it for $1, an original 1913 copy, and it is still one of my favourite books. It is just brilliant. Because Ani Besant and Charles Leadbeater were trained in the yogi art of magnification of vision. In our modern world, it is called remote viewing. And it is an art that has been studied and developed and taught by the military for espionage. And so the military are doing it, you can guarantee this is pretty serious stuff. So basically 100 years ago, these guys were studying this stuff through clairvoyant magnification of the vision. They were able to examine the elements of matter. And the picture on the front cover of the book here is the Anu, which is the first ether. Oh, sorry, forget about it. This is the little yogi, my yogi mate, who's it's the yogi siddhas, which is what has developed this ability to look at this stuff. Okay, so what we've got here is the breakdown of the hydrogen atom. You'll notice this here is your hydrogen gas. This little bit here. So your hydrogen gas is a spherical, an oblate spheroid, sort of a round shape. When you look at the elements through like an electron microscope, all they can see is a little fuzzy round ball, right? Hydrogen is the only atom that has this fuzzy round shape, actually. But you've got to remember that they're not stationary. They're actually tiny little things in massive high-speed motion that create the illusion of a solid object, right? But there's layer upon layer upon layer of this illusion of a solid object. So if we start with the gas, you've got, say, one atom of gas, like this big, and it's actually made up of a little tiny thing, tiny, going whizzing around, and creating this illusion of this object. And so if you stop it, if you can stop it, which is what these people were doing, Ani Besant and Charles, they were actually able to communicate with the atom and ask it to slow down its motions. And so they could then discern all the various bits that the atomic structure. And so if you imagine your atom here and it's made up of this tiny little thing that's whizzing around, so you ask it to stop and you can get hold of this little tiny thing and you get in closer and closer and it gets bigger and bigger, and you'll notice also that again, this little thing that was, once this little tiny thing going around, it's also made up of a little tiny thing going whizzing around and creating this physical object. And again, okay, stop that motion and zoom in on that and it gets bigger and again, the same thing. There's this little tiny thing going to make this imaginary solid object. And you get down to the first ether, which is it's called the Anu, and it's like a little toroidal vortex. And it's got a slightly different structure to all the others, because it winds around the outside and up the middle, and around the outside and up the middle. But you'll notice there's two, and there's a right-hand one and a left-hand one. And this is called the ultimate physical atom. But of course, it's etherical. To us, physical matter is the last three layers: your solid, your liquid, and your gas. And when Keshe talks about the plasmas, he's talking about the ethers. These are the four ethers. Plasma is the new name for etherics. Okay? And so, the ultimate physical atom, your Anu, your right-hand spiral, and your left-hand spiral, these are like your original duality. Right? And the duality, one of them is like your female form, and the energy is pouring into that, and it's manifesting creation, as we know it as our physical universe. And then the other spiral is taking the energy and putting it back out. And there's your male side, in a sense. Right? So you've got your duality, your positive, negative, male, female, and they have opposite actions, but there's your balance. That is your balance of your physical universe. And it starts way back there. The thing is, when you look at all the other atoms, you'll notice at the very top here, this is an original periodic law which is published in the Occult Chemistry book, and you notice at the very top here is hydrogen, and it's all up there all by itself. And down here on your standard periodic table, again, hydrogen, it's all on there all by itself. It's got its own little colour and its own little spot. You can notice that on this column here, it actually is unique to itself. And this is the material that Keshe is using as the central medium in his reactor, and he's operating with the hydrogen as his plasma. This is the access point. And if you notice the other shapes of this picture here is showing you the various shapes of the different elements. And in this chart here, there's a shape at the top of each row, and so all of these elements in this row have that same structure. So we have actually the elements are made in the image of the platonic solids. Now, from my ET friend, well, we know that there are 5 platonic solids. So my ET friend Bashar describes there are actually 7. And for years and years I was going, 7? What are these other 2? And I was looking at all sorts of things, but if you look at this picture here, there are 7 forms. 7 forms. And the odd 2 are the spike and the dumbbell. And Bashar explains that these 2 are not wholly physical, they're slightly kind of interdimensional. And so then you can understand, well, okay, it's like these are your fundamental shape of the physical universe is your tetrahedron. And all your sacred geometry and everything can be drawn out of your any of these shapes. But fundamentally, your tetrahedron actually is the primary shape behind all of these. And so these are like pre-tetrahedron. And so it's a bit of a mind tweak to get a handle on it, and I'm still working on it myself, but I'm trying to do my best to explain it to you guys so you get an idea of how it is possible that the mind has dominion over matter. And my understanding is this is the actual way it all works. Because what Keshe is at the point now, he's got his knowledge seekers meditating and making communication with this plasma reactor. And so the control of this ship that he's building is not by dials and knobs and steering wheels. It's direct mind link. The ship itself will be conscious. And this is what I've been looking for years and years. This is the key, and he explains it so beautifully. But it is so deep. He's had to be very, very cautious about how he introduces these ideas to society. But for me, I think it's because of my background with all the stuff that it's been my excitement all my whole life. I've seen this material, his work, and what he's presented, and it's like, ka-ching! This is it. This is the man. He really is. He's so brilliant, so brilliant. And I have studied.
At the bottom, Peter, the 2 dark squares.
The 2 are the bars and the star, and the interior of those is your icosahedron and your dodecahedron. And it's not very apparent on here, but the idea is that these shapes aren't actually created. They're suggested by the movement of the internal parts. Right? Now, the other thing is that even when you look at these atoms with your electron microscope and stuff, you've got to remember they're all in high-speed motion. So you would not see a tetrahedron. You would not see a cube. The reason you can see the picture is because Arnie Besant and Charles Ledevita were communicating directly with the atoms, and they could ask it to stop its motions so they could see the shape and the form of the various bits and pieces. Now that's high technology. You don't need hardware for that. You've got it built in already. So anyway, one of the next chaps I came across was John Worrell Keeling. And this is his date of birth and his date of death. He was around again, like over 100 years ago. And this man was studying, as a child, he was involved in something that the air supply for the big organs was done. In those days they had big church organs. And so they need a couple of boys to pump the air to make a sound. And of course when you pump in the air, there's not a lot of mental processing, you've just got to work your legs and keep it going. And so he's able to observe all the things that are happening from the vibrations of the organ. And the organ's up on the wall of the air will make a noise, and something down the end of the room will go when that particular note was played. And he noticed all these things, and he developed an interest, and he started studying it. And so in his later years, he developed a whole technology from the science of vibratory physics, sympathetic vibratory physics. Problem was, in those days, he was out on his own. He was developing a new science, similar to what Mr. Keshe is developing now. It's a new science with different concepts, right? And so Keely worked for many, many years trying to develop a power supply, a motor, an engine of some sort, using these principles. But the problem that he came across was that he was the only one that could operate this equipment. And the reason behind that is because he was dealing with the etheric forces. The etheric forces are connected through consciousness. You have these connections in your consciousness. And so it was his vibration, his personal energy that allowed these machines to operate. And so somebody else would come along and they'd do all the same little tweak this and tweak that, and it wouldn't go. Like Keely would touch him on the shoulder, the machine would go. So there's that connection in consciousness, and for me, this is very descriptive of the whole idea of how do you operate a spaceship. Right? You're connected through your consciousness. And so we have proof from 100 years ago of the reality of these ideas, right? And it's taken us this long for it to manifest in our society, because Keely was shut down. Now I did have, where did I put it? So I've got a little article here which I wanted to share with you people. Where is it? I can find it. There it is. Now, this is the one bit I'm going to read out for you, because I'd like to get it to you word for word. Excuse me, Libby. Right. So, this is provided from Dan Davidson, who's a researcher, from his book, A Breakthrough to New Free Energy Sources. John Keely, discoverer of sympathetic vibratory physics, found a means of negating the effect of gravity as well as developing a form of propulsion. Over 100 years ago, right? From 1888 to 1893, Keely worked on developing his system of aerial navigation. The first successful test was in 1893, which led the way to the construction of an aerial craft. In 1896, Mr. Keely had so perfected his system that he arranged to give a demonstration of the aerial craft to the United States War Department. Right? So this is on the record. It's not a fantasy, it's not a story, it's on the record.
That was probably his big mistake, that's why he sort of like only lasted till 1898.
He was taken out, man. Who knows? I don't know. No. Anyway, in attendance at the demonstration were a number of invited members of the press. So this got into the papers back then. Descriptions of the craft state that it was a circular platform, the shape of a flying saucer. Roughly 6 feet in diameter. On this platform was mounted a small stool set before a keyboard. It wasn't attached to the platform, it was just sitting there. Right? The keyboard was attached to numerous tuned resonation plates and vibratory mechanisms. Now if you look at this device on his desk here, this is one of his devices, and it's typical of his devices. Where you see all these little rods sticking out? These are tuned bits of metal. Have you ever seen those little machines that, you know, the little African musical instrument? You go pum, 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 pum. It's exactly what he was doing. Exactly, precisely. But it took a lot of concentration and expertise to tune his devices for his purposes that he was doing. But there's your basic technology that he had developed. Right. So, attached to various plates and vibratory mechanisms. Mr. Keely explained that these plates would cause the craft to rise and float above the ground when subjected to a polarized field, which would generate a negative attraction. So we're talking anti-gravity, right? Negative attraction. Right? When the effect was produced, the craft would come under the influence of the etheric polar current. Now what he's talking about here is a current from the earth itself. Right? He's tapped into the wheelworks of nature, right? Tuning into the earth's energy. And again, this is similar to what Mr. Keshe is describing. He is saying that originally he was describing his plasma reactor as a generator, and we would generate power. And then later on, he said, well, it's not actually a generator, it's a receiver. And it is receiving its energy from nature, basically from the sun. Right? The sun is the biggest power supply in our local space here. So there is where he was getting from. And Keely understood this, but trying to explain it to the scientists of the day. Anyway, the controlling mechanism consisted of a row of 100 vibratory bars. And you can see the bars up there. There's quite a few of the bars up there. So representing the enharmonic and diatonic scales. When half of the bars were damped, the craft would move at 500 miles per hour. 500 miles per hour. No wings, no propellers, no jet engines. This is before any of that stuff. Before we even had helium air float. If all the bars were damped, gravity would resume control and the craft would settle to the earth. There were no moving parts in the ship's propelling mechanism. Now this is very, very advanced. This is one of the items I've been keen on for many, many years. No moving parts. Consider, if you're out in space, do you want a machine that has, thousands of little working little midgets and digits, any one of which could break and you're dead in space? Gone, over, game over. But if you've got no moving parts, there's so much less to break down. And to my mind, that's space travel. That is technology. Okay. Not only that, it was unaffected by the weather and could rise above any storm. The instrument for guiding the airship was distinctly different from the propelling feature. Most astounding was the apparent total lack of acceleration effects to Mr. Keely as he sat on the stool before the keyboard controlling the airship. Now, if you've heard of stories of flying saucers, and they go, zoom, and they don't stop, and they'll do a right-hand turn. So, right? What's happening to the people inside that craft? We would think, inertial effects of gravity and all that sort of stuff, and you're going to slam up against the wall. No. When you're inside the craft is creating its own gravitational centre. You are enclosed in a field, and that is like your own private little universe. And it's like sitting there in your own private little universe looking at a TV. And there's all this motion going on the TV, but you're sitting there. That's what it's like. Right? And so this is the shift in the ideas and the understanding of what this technology is about. Right? This is a very, very advanced concept. And to get it through to the mass population, it's like they're going to go, oh, science fiction, right? But, here it is. This guy was demonstrating it over 100 years ago. And it's taken all this time to re-emerge. But of course, he's not the only one that did this. One of the guys who, the champion of Keely's work now is a guy named Dale Pond. And he has a website called SVPwiki, after Wikipedia. And it's like an encyclopedic volume upon volume of his studies and work of Keely, and he's really, really brilliant. This device up here, the Alia, is one of the devices that Dale has been able to restore. But there's very, very few machines of Keely's left on the planet today. And so Dale's doing a fantastic job in sharing this info and learning about it and bringing the technology back for us. One of the remarkable things about this machine is that when it's running, it creates an aura around it that has a healing effect. So this is not a destructive technology, this is a technology that is using the creative and beneficial energies, and it manifests.
Could you say his name and website again?
Dale Pond. And his website is SVPwiki. Yeah. And so, of course, Keely demonstrated this flying machine 7 years before the Wright brothers. Now, why isn't he famous? It's like there's something seriously wrong with our media. You know, to hide something like this. This is totally awesome technology, and we should all be using it. But, and of course, there's a contemporary of Keeley was Nikola Tesla. I'm quite sure they actually got together at some stage, and they would have understood each other. There would have been very, very few people that would really have understood Tesla, and just as few people who would understand the work of Keeley. So Tesla should be famous for developing an alternating current. And there's a small circle of researchers like myself who know who he is. And I was boggled to meet a university professor a little while ago who he was in electrical and computer engineering. He had never heard of Tesla. Never heard of him. And he's been through university. So when I introduced him to the works of Tesla, he quit his job to go and study again. Yeah. So what is Tesla's doing here now? This is after Tesla had developed alternating current. Alternating current, as we know, is the power supply we know throughout the whole world. And Tesla is the man who is responsible. And everyone knows of the work of Edison. Edison in the day is a contemporary of Tesla, and he was a champion of direct current power. Now, there was a serious problem with direct current power, and is that due to the forces of resistance, you would lose your power as you tried to transmit it to the shop down the road. And so there were serious losses in the development of trying to share that kind of energy around the place. And it was Tesla who developed the alternating current system that allows you to transmit power over long distances and put it around the place. And so Tesla was funded, of course, by very wealthy individuals, and of course they were heavily invested in copper to make the wires that would transmit this, share this power around the neighbourhoods. And so Tesla, of course, after developing that system, Tesla wanted to carry on, and of course, being an intellectual scientist and humanitarian. After doing that, he was quite wealthy and decided, I'm going to go and study some more. And so he set up his Colorado Springs laboratory. This is the inside of his laboratory, to study the forces of nature, to study the resonances and the energies of the planet. And he started with, in the early days, he started with understanding electricity and magnetism. But in his later days, at Colorado Springs, he discovered how to access the etherics, how to access the more subtle realms, which Keshe is calling the plasmas now. And it was through the station where he discovered how to transmit power without wires. And that is the reason you don't know his name now. It's because he was in direct competition or opposition in the sense to the ideas of the money men who wanted to put a wire across and put the meter on the end of the wire. You can count how much power they used and pay us the money. So, that's the way I understand it. That's the basic reason why Tesla, they made every effort to remove him from our history books, and you don't see him in the university textbooks anywhere. It's like, but there's a growing group of people that have studied his work, like myself, and are experimenting with it. The one man who is responsible for sharing his understanding of what Tesla was actually doing, because many people who build Tesla coils have no idea. They think they're still dealing with electromagnetism, and it's not. It's gone beyond electromagnetism. In his later years, Tesla was actually in a court case with Marconi. Marconi is famous for the communications systems, and of course, he was using all of Tesla's patents in his equipment. And Tesla took him to court and said, look, you're violating my patents. And the court case dragged on and on and on, and it wasn't solved until after Tesla had died. But in the court cases, it's on the record, they were asking Tesla to explain what a system is about, and Tesla was explaining, this is not an electromagnetic system. And because nobody understood him, it was like in one ear and out the others. But he said it repeatedly, and it's on the record. I've seen the transcripts of the court cases, and it's on the record. He's saying over and over, this is not electromagnetic, and nobody understood. So, how do we know it's not electromagnetic? Everyone's familiar with Einstein's famous equation, right? Now it's talking about c, which is the speed of light, which is 300,000 kilometers per second. Well, Tesla discovered a wave function that has a higher speed than the speed of light. And it is from this formula here, pi over 2 times c. Now pi over 2 is equal to 1.57. And this is a very, very interesting number. And we'll come across this in a little bit further. Just remember that number. Okay, so Tesla was around till the 1940s. And the Americans weren't that interested in, or they appeared to be not very interested in his technology. But I'm not 100%, but there is word that he did share some of his info with the Germans. And there's also understood that the Germans were developing the technology of Victor Schauberger, who was also a student of nature. Right? So understanding the natural forces, and through the understanding of the natural forces, the Germans were actually able to build flying saucers back in the 30s and 40s. And you might say, well, anyone can do these drawings in fake black and white photos, but if you look at this particular one up here, this was built in what? 1942. 1942. You've probably heard of Adamski. Well, Adamski was taking photos of this very same craft in 1952. He apparently made contact with beings from Venus. Well, I kind of doubt it. But he's very famous for his work, and he even got to go on board the craft and was shown around inside. So there's this diagram from his book, which I have in my library. And so, you know, it's like some very big questions about our own history. You know? And again, this one here is from a newspaper article in 1960. So we're approaching the present day. Now, Otis T. Carr was a protege of Nikola Tesla. After Tesla was shut down from his big industry, he went into small-scale inventions. One of his devices was an electric car which didn't need recharging. And he also developed a theory of gravity, which you'll be very hard-pressed to find a copy of. And so this is from his understanding of his work in gravity. And his protege, Otis Carr, was a hotel clerk at the hotel where Tesla spent his last years. He actually pretty much lived in the hotel his whole life, so he was, you know, well looked after. But again, the present day champion of the work of Otis Carr and Tesla is a man by the name of Ralph Ring, and you can find him on YouTube. And Ralph Ring was one of the partners of Otis T. Carr, or the workers who helped construct and develop this flying saucer technology. What he's describing is that he actually was on board this craft, and it was operated by the mind. There were no knobs and buttons and switches. It was mind-controlled vehicle. And so obviously Tesla understood these ideas, and he did his best to share it and make sure it made its way to the future. And of course, after their first couple of flights, they were organising the Otis Carr, the group that was around Otis Carr was preparing to share it with the world, and they were planning to do demos in all the major cities. Well, of course, a day or so before they were about to hit the road, the guys with the guns arrived and big trucks, and they packed everything up and confiscated everything. And so there we are.
This is in the 1960s, wasn't it?
1960s, yep. And so, you know, again, if you spend a bit of time like I do looking around, you can find all this stuff. And then one of the other very famous men with flying saucer technology is John Searl. I met John when he was in New Zealand some years ago. And his basic engine, and this is it. This is a diagrammatic representation of his engine. And it's like, it's magnetic rings and magnetic rollers, and that is it. When this device is put together correctly, it spontaneously rotates the rings around, the rollers around the rings. And it generates massive electric and magnetic and gravitational fields, and he'd lost numerous of these devices off into space before he learned how to control it. Now, a lot of people will say, well, you know, it's like baloney. But then again, there's the Russians who simplified his device and replicated it back in the, I think it's the 80s. And this is a couple of Russian professors from a university. They got private funding to build up this system, and this is a photograph of their actual system. And this is a diagram from their scientific explanation or dissertation of what they were doing. So the column up here is the speed of rotation, and the line down the bottom here is the loss of gravity as it accelerates. And so there's the proof of the concept of this particular device. Although it's not operated by consciousness, possibly it would have developed if it had been allowed to continue as well. So as it reaches around 400 RPM, it starts losing weight. And at around 550 RPM, it starts to accelerate and move off into space. And at that point, they put a load on it. And it balanced out at 7,000 watts of output power, and it was stable. But it was also at 35% of its original weight. And so again, you know, there's more proof that all this stuff is totally for real. As far as I'm concerned, totally for real. And then of course again, 1960, there's a work of Townsend Brown, who was interested in exploring gravity electrically. And one of his most famous experiments was the rotating discs. And again, you know, a disc-shaped object, highly charged on the leading edge, and it rotates around just because of the high charging. And there's no moving parts. Again, no moving parts. I really like this, no moving parts. And so his earlier model, 2 feet across with 50,000 volts, was rotating at around 11 miles an hour. And then when he built a bigger one, which is what present in this picture here, actual photograph on his work, he made a disc of 3 foot in diameter, and he put 150,000 volts across it, and the results were classified. So you can imagine what it was doing. So that's back in the 60s. And the thing is, what we want to point out here is that we're not dealing with explosive energies. We're dealing with living energies. And the living energies are manifest in nature everywhere. And this diagram here, the Fibonacci spiral, is developed from that formula from Tesla earlier. If you notice this number down here, you have to excuse the comma there, it should be a dot. And this is 1.618, which is very, very close to 1.57, which is from pi over 2. Right, this is the speed that Tesla determined his energies were radiating at, faster than the speed of light. And so, obviously, you know, this is the geometry of nature. It is the geometry of growing things, the geometry of living things. And everything can be extrapolated back to the Platonic solids, and you only need a tetrahedron. And once you understand a bit of math and you're able to play with your numbers and bits and pieces, everything in nature can be developed from the geometry and the relationships in this structure here. And so, this is the starship formation of plasma reactors of Mr. Keshe. And he has a patent which is labelled the gravitational and energy system. And there's a little diagram of this plasma reactor. And there's an artist's rendition of the ship that he's planning on building. And so, I've been studying the work of Mr. Keshe for a couple of years now, and I'm well underway with my own reactors here. They're actually really, really simple technology. There's some complex ideas to get a handle on, but the technology itself is really, really basic, which is why I really, really love it. It's just it's beautiful, beautiful. Again, it's based on the functions of nature and very simple techniques of accessing the energies of the ethers. Of course, Keshe is calling them the plasmas, which is fine. You know? You can name it whatever you like. But it started, my research started some years ago with experimenting with making the nanosolids, of the nanomaterials. And I have a sample here. If there's any electricians in the audience here, you might know about electricity a wee bit. If you take an ordinary multimeter and you put it across a piece of copper, you'll get a 0 reading. There's nothing going on there, right? But if you take a piece of copper and coat it with nanomaterials, and you take your little meter and you put it across it, you'll get a reading. There is spontaneous production of energy coming out of these materials.
Can you give a brief description of a nanomaterial?
Sorry?
What is a nanomaterial?
Okay, nano is like, have you heard of monatomics? Okay, atoms have a tendency to coalesce into molecules. So it's fairly rare that you get atoms all by themselves. Right? They like to partner up. And it's the same with if you remember the diagram of the hydrogen atom, there were inside that little bubble, there were 2 triangles. Right? The hydrogen is only one of those triangles. The hydrogen molecule is 2 hydrogen atoms. Right? Atoms like to partner up. And so a monoatomic is a very rare thing, or is it? You know, it's rare because we don't have the technology to generally detect it. Right? So as our consciousness grows, as our technology advances, we detect things that were not possible to detect earlier. Right? And so now we're relearning, the way I understand it, this is all done by the Egyptians and the Vedas and the ancient sciences years ago. So we're now relearning about, the etheric technologies, and we're at the point now where our consciousness is approaching readiness to be able to understand these ideas, right? And so with the understanding, of course, comes with a whole new technology, and it's like from my explorations in consciousness through my meditation and stuff, I have left my body on numerous occasions. And so I know for me, it's a fact, it's a reality that I already have my spaceship. Right? It's a reality for me that I am not my body. My body is a vehicle. It's a very limited vehicle, but it is possible to get out of this limited vehicle and have unlimited access to the rest of the universe. And of course, technology is such fun for a boy.